Imagine walking into a room expecting a bit of a laugh at your expense, only to walk out having changed lives forever. That's precisely what happened to a cleaner who was unknowingly set up on a blind date as a cruel wind-up. What nobody banked on was how the evening would unfold and the words from a powerful managing director that would leave an entire restaurant silent, with tears in their eyes. This isn't just a story about love or cruelty. It's a story of dignity, respect, and the incredible power of kindness. Stay with me, because the moment you hear what she said, you'll never look at people in quite the same way again. It all began with a group of office workers at a prestigious firm in the city of London, the kind of place where sharp suits, designer shoes, and a certain polish were the order of the day. Among them, the cleaner, Arthur, stood out. Not because anyone noticed him, but precisely because they didn't. He was the chap who came in early and stayed on late, emptying bins, wiping down desks, fixing leaky taps, and mopping up coffee spills left by people too busy or too self-important to clean up after themselves. To most, he wasn't a person with his own hopes or struggles. He was just part of the furniture. But Arthur carried himself with a quiet dignity, a solid work ethic, and a story no one had ever bothered to ask about. One Friday afternoon, a few employees decided they'd have a bit of a laugh. They signed Arthur up for a blind date at a smart restaurant in nearby Mayfair, matching him with someone they claimed was just his type. The plan was simple. Watch from a distance and have a good old snigger when the cleaner turned up in his drab clothes, looking completely out of his depth. They were expecting a car crash, pure and simple. What they didn't expect was who would be sitting across from him. When Arthur walked into the restaurant, visibly nervous but trying to keep his composure, he wore the only suit he owned, a slightly worn number from a high-street shop he kept for weddings and funerals. His shoes were polished but old, and his hands were rough from years spent scrubbing floors. He looked around, adjusting his tie, until he saw her. Sitting elegantly at a corner table was a woman in her early 40s, wearing a deep blue dress that radiated confidence and class. Her name was Eleanor, though Arthur didn't know yet that she was the managing director of the very company he worked for. Eleanor had been told she was meeting someone interesting. As Arthur approached, she saw the anxiety in his eyes, the way he clutched his jacket, and something about his gentle manner made her heart soften. The pranksters, sitting across the room and pretending to be ordinary diners, hid their smirks behind menus, waiting for the awkwardness to kick in. But Eleanor leaned in, smiled warmly, and said, "You must be Arthur, then? It's lovely to meet you." Her voice was genuine, filled with a warmth that immediately put him at ease. Arthur's hands trembled slightly as he drew out the chair. He wasn't used to this sort of kindness, not from people who looked like her. As they started talking, he stumbled over his words, apologizing for not being as polished or worldly as her. But Eleanor stopped him gently. "Please," she said, "tell me a bit about yourself, not what you do for a living. What are you passionate about?" Slowly, Arthur opened up. He spoke of how he'd once dreamed of being a teacher, but life had thrown a spanner in the works when his father died young, leaving him to provide for his mom and younger siblings. He'd worked 2 jobs right through his 20s, given up on uni, and poured everything into making sure his family got by. His mother eventually passed, and his siblings grew up and moved on. But by then, Arthur was used to being in the shadows. He never complained. He believed dignity wasn't about a job title, but about honest, hard work. As Arthur spoke, Eleanor listened, completely captivated. The sniggering from the pranksters' table grew quieter. They'd expected a fumbling fool to embarrass himself. Instead, they saw a humble man speaking with honesty, strength, and a quiet pride. When the waiter came by, Arthur nervously scanned the prices, worried he couldn't afford even a starter. He whispered that he might just get a coffee, but Eleanor smiled and said, "Please, don't you worry about the bill. This is my treat. Tonight I'd just love to hear your story." The meal stretched on for over an hour, and by the end of it, something extraordinary happened. Eleanor stood up, glass in hand, and spoke, not just to Arthur, but loud enough for the entire restaurant, including the pranksters, to hear. She said, "I came here tonight for a simple dinner. What I found was something far more meaningful. This man, sitting here, many of you might overlook him, as people do every day. But his story, his sacrifice, his resilience, Those things are worth more than any top-floor office or million-pound deal. Respect isn't about wealth or position. It's about our shared humanity. And tonight, Arthur reminded me of that simple truth. The restaurant fell silent. A few diners wiped their eyes. The pranksters, mortified and cringing with embarrassment, quietly pushed their chairs back, the cruelty of their joke hitting them full force. Arthur just sat there, stunned, his eyes welling up. For the first time in years, someone truly saw him. Not as the cleaner, not as a nobody, but as a human being worthy of respect. By the end of the night, Eleanor shook his hand firmly and said, "Arthur, you've given me more perspective in one evening than most people manage in years. I do hope this isn't the last time we speak." And in that moment, Arthur realized that dignity isn't something people can take from you. It shines brightest when the world does its best to dim it. The story got out, of course, people whispering about how the MD had stood up for the cleaner, how her words had humbled everyone who was there. But for Arthur, the real gift wasn't the attention. It was the reminder that his worth had been there all along, just waiting for someone to see it. And for those who tried to humiliate him, the night became a lesson they would never forget. Sometimes the joke you play on someone else becomes the truth that changes you.